all to this session 2 of our series 2 of clinical rounds with Jindal IVF. So as we have the topic of ovulation induction with gonadotropins. Now this remains a cornerstone of fertility treatment. The use of gonadotropin demands thoughtful clinical judgment. So today we will revisit the key principles, review the current evidence, and discuss the practical points that can help us refine our clinical approach. We'll look into the real world challenges and explore how the protocols are evolving. I encourage all of you to please ask questions and share your thoughts with us. For this, I would like to invite our expert, Dr. Umesh Jindal ma'am. Some people practice medicine, but some people transform lives. And that is our dear Dr. Jindal. It's my privilege and honor to welcome her. She's not just an IVF specialist, but a pioneer, a guide, and for many couples, a symbol of renewed faith. For decades, she has stood at the forefront of reproductive medicine. She's combining the science, empathy, and commitment. I welcome you, ma'am. And next, I would like to invite our speaker for today's talk, Dr. Anupam Gupta, ma'am. She's a senior IVF consultant at Jindal IVF, and she's the co-convener of IFS, former secretary of Greater Chandigarh chapter. She was the former treasurer, COGS. She's the teaching faculty and academic curriculum in charge for the IFS fellows at our institute. Madam has more than 20 years of experience in the field of IVF. Her precision and dedication in the field of IVF has given hopes and smiles to many couples. I welcome you, ma'am, to proceed with the session now.
Thank you, Gitika. A very good evening to all. So the topic for today is ovulation induction with gonadotropins. As infertility specialists, we use gonadotropins day in and day out. But many times we are in a fix as to how to stimulate a patient with gonadotropins. So today we'll share some of the practical tips of dealing with interesting cases. I will not go much into the theory part. Mostly we'll deal with I will deal with 4 clinical scenarios, and you can ask questions whenever you have any doubt. So first, at the outset, let us know what is the difference between ovulation induction and controlled ovarian stimulation. Ovulation induction is to induce monofollicular development and ovulation in anovulatory infertile women, for example, in PCO. And controlled ovarian stimulation is applied to already ovulating women to boost the ovulatory capacity. That is to produce multiple ovulating follicles, for example, in unexplained infertility. Now, gonadotropin treatment for induction of ovulation in anovulatory women began in the 1960s, and for stimulating multifollicular development in ovulatory women began in the 1980s. The 3 main types of urinary gonadotropin extracts used for ovarian stimulation are human menopausal gonadotropin, which contains equal amounts of FSH and LH, FSH, which contains only FSH, and highly purified FSH. Now, the older preparations, they were prepared from menopausal urine, and they used to contain more than 95% of protein impurities and varying amounts of FSH, LH, and HCG. Later, with the improvements in purification techniques, there was standardization of the FSH and LH activities to 75 units for each gonadotropin, although less than 5% extraneous urinary proteins still exist in today's HMG products. It is important to underline that the LH activity in HMG is derived primarily from the HCG component. So later, with advancements, the pharma companies started to manufacture gonadotropin synthetically using DNA recombinant technology. So thus, recombinant gonadotropins came into the market. These recombinant gonadotropins are purer. They can be given subcutaneously, so they can be self-administered. There is batch-to-batch consistency. They contain less protein and other contaminants, so they are safe. They are slightly more potent than urinary gonadotropins, so slightly lower overall dose is required. Now, the different recombinant gonadotropins available, different forms of pure recombinant FSH preparations have been developed for ovarian stimulation. For the recombinant FSH are folitropin alpha, beta, and more recently folitropin delta. Lutropin alpha was the only pure recombinant LH preparation in the market. It was by the name of Luveris, but nowadays it is not available. Instead, a combined preparation of recombinant FSH, LH, and LH by the name of Pergoveris is available as a single injection, where FSH and LH are in the ratio of 2:1. So these are the various urinary gonadotropins. I'll not propagate any pharma company. And these are the recombinant gonadotropins. And this is Pergoveris, which contains recombinant FSH and LH. Now, recombinant gonadotropins. Colifolitropin alpha is the only long-acting recombinant FSH available, which allows for a half-life of up to 1 week with a single subcutaneous injection. It is only used for IVF protocols because a single dose can initiate and sustain multifollicular growth, while other urinary and recombinant FSH can be used for both ovulation induction and IVF. Ovulation triggering and induction of final oocyte maturation is performed with HCG, which binds the same receptors as LH. Now, the ovulation induction with gonadotropin remains central to IVF practice, ovulation induction practice. The goals are mainly monofollicular development or controlled ovarian stimulation. For this, we have to individualize the dose and prevent OHSS. Now, according to WHO, the anovulatory disorders are classified into 3 groups. First is hypogonadotropic hypogonadism, where there are low gonadotropins and low E2 levels. Gonadotropins can be used in this case. Second is normogonadotropic normogonadism, where normal gonadotropins are there and normal E2 levels. For example, in PCOS, here also we can use gonadotropins. Class 3 is hypergonadotropic hypogonadism, where there are high gonadotropins and low E2 levels. Here, gonadotropins are of no use, and here IVF with ovum donation is advised. So, first we'll deal with group 1, hypogonadotropic hypogonadism. This group accounts for approximately 5 to 10% of anovulatory women, and those with low FSH levels and low E2 levels due to absent or abnormal GnRH secretion or pituitary insensitivity to GnRH. Examples include women with hypothalamic amenorrhea related to nutritional or emotional stress, weight loss, excessive exercise, anorexia, and its variants like Kallmann syndrome. Women with hypothalamic amenorrhea are unlikely to respond to oral agents such as clomiphene citrate and letrozole. Here, treatment should include gonadotropin preparations with both FSH and LH activity to effectively stimulate steroidogenesis and folliculogenesis. So in hypo, we have to give only gonadotropins. We can't give oral ovulogens. Group 2 consists of normogonadotropic normoestrogenic anovulation. This group is the largest, including 75 to 85% of anovulatory women, and is characterized by normal serum FSH and estradiol levels and normal or elevated LH concentrations. The most common example is PCOS, some of whom ovulate at least occasionally. Here, exogenous gonadotropin treatment for ovulation induction can be given for women who fail to respond to lifestyle modifications or oral agents. Mind you, it is the second line treatment for ovulation induction in PCOS. The first line treatment is weight loss and oral ovulogens. So the third group is hypergonadotropic hypogonadism. This group accounts for approximately 10 to 20% of anovulation and includes those with elevated serum FSH and low serum E2 and low AMH concentrations. They usually have amenorrhea. The classic example is premature ovarian insufficiency due to follicular depletion, and they do not respond to gonadotropins and require IVF with ovum donation. So in the pre-treatment, now we'll proceed with the cases. So in the pre-treatment evaluation, apart from the routine investigations, we have to check for hormones, TSH and prolactin. HST may be done or may not be done, but we usually prefer to do it so that we are confident that the tubes are patent. But if there is no history of any intervention or infection, we may omit it also. And semen analysis should be normal. Now, first case. This patient is 31 years with primary infertility for 3 years.
Just a minute, Anupam. Anybody has any question till now? Vineet, you wanted to know about these gonadotropins. Any specific question?
Ma'am, in cases of when there is low AMH and the age is just 35, 36, but just first cycle, I think we can start with the urinary ones, or straight away we should go for recombinant.
We'll be dealing with various cases now later on.
Okay.
It is just that I just wanted to mention the cost of recombinant gonadotropins is almost double of that of urinary
Yeah, that's the reason that we always start with that, and recombinant actually we reserve at least for the second cycle. Like, this is what I was thinking, and I just wanted to confirm.
Actually, we hardly use recombinant gonadotropins for ovarian stimulation and IUI. We use it mainly for
IVF.
IVF.
Hmm.
For IUI, we mainly resort to urinary gonadotropins.
That is the urinary only. That is.
So
Are there any criteria or guidelines anywhere given when to switch over from oral ovulations to the gonadotropins? Any criteria or guideline? How many cycles we can try for oral ovulations and then we shift to the gonadotropins?
after 2 to 3 cycles, if the patient is not responding to, in case of PCOS, after 2 to 3 cycles, if the patient is not responding to lifestyle management and oral ovulations, we switch on to gonadotropins. So this patient was 31 years with primary infertility for 3 years. Her periods were irregular. Her routine investigations were normal, but her AMH was 6.5. Her BMI was normal. On ultrasound, the ovaries were polycystic. Uterus was normal. Husband semen was normal. She gave history of previous 2 cycles of ovulation induction with letrozole 2.5 milligram, and on follicular monitoring, there was no ovulation. Now, how will you manage this case? So this was the picture of the ovary. It was polycystic and the uterus was normal with the linear endometrium. So this talk is based on this ASRM practice committee of ASRM has issued a committee opinion about the use of exogenous gonadotropins for ovulation induction in anovulatory women. And according to this, when we are stimulating, in fact, any patient when we are stimulating, especially in PCOS, gonadotropin cycles should be actually managed by a clinician with the requisite training and experience. And first, in PCOS, counseling should be done regarding the cost of injections, because even urinary injection costs about 800 to 900 rupees. And the cost of recombinant gonadotropins is almost double. So frequent visits are required in case of PCOS, because the response is very slow. We have to go very slowly. And in case multiple follicles develop, we have to counsel the patient that there is possibility of dropping the cycle to prevent OHSS, or we might have to convert it to IVF. So this counseling should be done before you take up a case for ovulation induction in case of PCOS. Now, baseline, first we do the baseline USG to exclude any ovarian cysts that may be confused with ovarian follicles. Now, next the question comes, which gonadotropin should we use? Should we use highly purified FSH or HMG or recombinant FSH? So it has been seen that exogenous FSH alone can induce ovulation in women with PCO because endogenous LH levels are adequate. But added LH does not appear to be harmful, so we can use any. According to Cochrane, ovulation induction with FSH is a second-line treatment. This I have already said. It's a second-line treatment in women with PCOS who do not conceive on clomiphene or letrozole. And there is no difference in live birth, multiple pregnancy, clinical pregnancy, or miscarriage rates between recombinant FSH and urinary FSH. And also, if we compare HMD versus urinary FSH, it was seen that there was no difference in the rates of live birth, multiple pregnancy, clinical pregnancy, or miscarriage. So we can use any recombinant FSH or urinary FSH or HMG. It doesn't make much of a difference. I personally use urinary FSH in cases of PCOS. So now the next question comes, what dose should we use? So low dose step-up regimen, we start with 37.5 to 75 units of recombinant. This dose is available only in recombinant FSH. So if you have to use this protocol, you have to use recombinant FSH. 37.5 to 75 units of recombinant FSH daily. This is recommended by the ESHRE ASRM Consensus Workshop Group. And ultrasound should be performed after 4 or 5 injections, like it should be performed on day 8 or 9 of periods, and at subsequent intervals of 2 to 3 days according to response. So first is the baseline ultrasound. Then we give a low dose of gonadotropins for 5 days, and then we call the patient on day 8 and 9 to assess the response. Thereafter, we have to call the patient frequently after 2 to 3 days. If there is no follicle more than 10 mm, then increase the dose in small increments after 5 to 7 days. For this, pen devices, they allow more finely tuned incremental dosing. This 37.5 we cannot give in recombinant, we cannot give in urinary gonadotropins. They are available as 75 units ampules. So if we have to give this dose, it is available as recombinant gonadotropin in the form of a pen. So there we can titrate the dose and give small increments. So the aim is monofollicular development. Although 9 to 12 total days of treatment is typical, but longer duration of treatment may be required in case of PCOS. It may go as long as 20 to 25 days. Once a mature follicle is developed, exogenous HCG is administered to stimulate ovulation, followed by timed intercourse or IUI. The key point is start low, go slowly. You require patience, patient also requires patience, and you should not be aggressive in PCOS, in treating PCOS patients. So this was a study, but nowadays we are resorting to sequential letrozole followed by FSH therapy, which has been shown to be more effective rather than this recombinant gonadotropins, because they prove very costly also. So this was the case. In this case, because she had been given letrozole 2.5 only initially. So first we gave her letrozole twice daily. We thought she might ovulate with 5 milligram. And on day 9, when she came, there was no follicle. The ovaries were just in the resting phase. There was no follicle. Endometrium was linear. So we decided to add FSH. So we gave her for 3 days. And when she came on day 12, there was a nice follicle of 15 mm and with endometrium of 7.6. We gave her gonadotropins for 2 more days. When a mature follicle developed, the endometrium was nice 9.5 triple line, and we gave the trigger followed by timed intercourse, and she conceived in this cycle. But all cases of PCO are not so simple. This is a simple case where she responded to gonadotropins, though on day 9 there was no follicle. The ovary was just in the resting phase. This is a second case where patient was given letrozole 5 milligram. On day 8, when she came, all the follicles, there were multiple follicles which seemed to be recruited, but endometrium was linear. So we added small dose of gonadotropins. We gave her just 75 units of gonadotropin on alternate day. The second day we did not give, only 75 units we gave on 16th, and 17th we did not give anything, and we called her on after 2 days. When we saw her on the 8th day, the response, there was no response. It was the picture, ultrasound picture was same. So we continued alternate day injections for 3 days. And then when we called her on day 13, still the response was same. So the patients were also getting impatient, and we were also getting impatient. So we increased the dose slightly and made 75 units daily. And when she came after 2 days, all the follicles seemed to be recruited, and the ovary was it seemed to be very angry. It seemed that all the follicles had come up. Now, this is a very dangerous situation. This patient, if we continue stimulation, she will end up in OHSS. So here you need to counsel the patient that either you drop the cycle or you convert it to IVF. The patient was not mentally prepared, so she opted to drop the cycle. Now, in the next cycle, we gave her progesterone withdrawal. In the next cycle, when she came, we gave her letrozole and we overlapped it with small dose of gonadotropins on day 6 and 8. When she came on day 10, there was a dominant follicle with a 7 mm endometrium. Now, when a dominant follicle has come, then we can increase the dose. So from alternate day, we made it daily. And when she came after 3 days, there was a mature follicle with a nice endometrium. And here we gave the trigger, and it was followed by timed intercourse. And then the patient conceived in this cycle. This was the mature follicle, and this is the nice triple line endometrium, and the patient conceived in this cycle. So in PCO, you have to be very particular about prevention of OHSS. So for this lowest effective dose, frequent monitoring is required, And if you see over response, you should cancel it rather than putting the patient in danger for the risk of OHSS.
Ma'am, according to your experience, whether the sequential addition of gonadotropins is more beneficial or the overlap, like in your two cases, you added FSH later on after 5 days of letrozole, and in another one, you just overlapped the FSH. So, which one is better?
Actually, each case of PCO is different. There is no hard and fast rule that you have to do sequential, like after 7 days only you have to add gonadotropins, or you have to overlap it. It varies from patient to patient, depends on the ovarian response. You have to go slowly. First, we just increase the dose of like letrozole. And when we saw on dates, some may ovulate with that only, with 5 milligram only. But since there was no follicle, then we added it. This is in fact, the first cycle is in fact a finding factor, dose finding cycle. And in now when she did not respond with after adding gonadotropins on day 8, then we in the next cycle we overlap it with letrozole.
Okay, with the
Like
gonad.
in first cycle we give sequential, but if there is no response, then we overlap it in the next cycle.
Okay, ma'am. And ma'am, any role of adding Dexona? Because with CC we add Dexona, or like Letros we add Dexona in PCO patients especially. So in with gonadotropins also, any role?
No, we can add it dexamethasone. We can add with the letrozole, and it has been found that it also improves ovulation and conception rates. It has been found to be very useful because hyperandrogenism is there after all in PCO, and dexamethasone suppresses the intra-ovarian androgens. So as many people who were resistant to letrozole alone, when they were combined with dexamethasone, they ovulated. So it can be tried.
And what about clomiphene? You didn't try clomiphene in this patient?
No, because clomiphene gives a multifollicular development. I usually only use letrozole, and if it doesn't work, I add gonadotropins. I'm not in favor of clomiphene using clomiphene in PCO. Even Ashray says that letrozole is the first line drug for
PCO.
PCO.
Dr. Anupam, what about step-up letrozole therapies which are being tried these days for resistant PCOS?
Yes, we can use those also. We can use those also. They are also a good option. We can use, but it has been normally nowadays. Previously, they were said that you can increase to about 10 milligram also. First, you give 2.5, then you give 5, then 7.5, and you can increase up to 10 days. But they found that the results are not good. So nowadays, they are restricting to 5 milligram only. The recent papers say that you should increase it to 5 milligram only, and if it doesn't work, you add gonadotropins. So now we proceed with the second case. This was a 28 years primary infertility for 5 years. This is a very interesting case. She had primary amenorrhea. Progesterone withdrawal was negative, and even the combination withdrawal was absent. However, on sequential hormones, like when she was given estradiol for 20 days with the addition of progesterone on the last 7 days, withdrawal bleed was present. Her secondary sex characters were present, and BMI was normal. On ultrasound, uterus was hypoplastic and there was small amount of fluid present, and bilateral ovaries were small. Husband semen was normal. When we investigated her FSH was 0.1 milli-international units and LH was less than 0.09. TSH, prolactin, and AMH were normal. Now, what is your diagnosis and how will you proceed in this case?
Case of hypo.
Yeah. So this was the ultrasound picture. The ovaries were hardly visible. It was very difficult to localize these ovaries, hypoplastic ovaries. And the uterus was also small, hypoplastic with a streak of fluid in it. These hypoplastic hypo patients, they usually behave like menopausal, and the uterus is very small and the fluid also comes in these cases. So in these patients, they need FSH and LH activity because both the hormones are low. So we can use either HMG because it is cost effective. But if it doesn't work, then we can add recombinant LH. So here we should start HMG in a low dose, 75 units per day, and titrate every 5 to 7 days. There is slower follicular recruitment and it requires a long stimulation. HCG trigger is given when the follicle reaches 18 mm, like in usual cases, but we cannot give GnRH as a trigger in these cases. And luteal support is essential as there is no endogenous LH surge. So in this case, what we did was we gave her injection HMG for 6 days. And when we called her after 6 days, there was no response at all. There was no follicle. The endometrium was also linear. So we decided to increase the dose. We gave her 150 units of HMG for 3 more days. And when we called her, still there was no response. So now we were very bugged up. And so we decided to add Luveris. When we added Luveris and called her after 4 days, there was a nice dominant follicle, 14 mm on one side and 13 mm on the other side, with the triple line endometrium, 8 mm. And the fluid had also disappeared. So we continued now 150 units of HMG for 2 more days along with Luveris. And this led to the formation of a dominant follicle, for mature follicle when trigger was given, followed by IUM. And the patient conceived in this cycle. So there is certain subset of hypo patients who do not respond to HMG and require recombinant LH. Because in this case, the LH was very, very low. It was less than 0.09. So otherwise, these patients usually respond to HMG. But this particular case, she did not respond to HMG. She required LH. So
And then how long we can take this stimulation? Like how many days we can take a case for hypo, like
these
maximum?
patients, here also the stimulation goes long, may go about 20 to 25 days also. Sometimes it may go. So ma'am had a talk on this topic yesterday only. Ma'am, any comments from your side about this hypo patients?
Mute, ma'am, unmute. Ma'am, please unmute.
So you have to counsel this patient in the very beginning that the stimulation would be very long, and it can range up to anything. I know somebody telling me personal communications that they continued for 45 days because the patient wouldn't give up. So and the nice follicle formed after 45 days. So, that's different, but usually by 20th day or the 18th, 20th day, the follicle does come up. And second thing is about the uterus. Most common question which is usually asked is regarding the uterus. The follicle develops, but does the uterus also develop simultaneously? Because there is a controversy that people, give 2-3 cycles of estrogen and progesterone priming for before they start ovulation induction, whether we require to do that or we don't require to do that. But in general, if the patient has not been, this is the first cycle, I would like to see her endometrial response by giving her exogenous estrogen. And if I'm confident that her uterus is developing and endometrium is developing, then we can start with ovulation induction. There's no need of priming, and this little fluid usually just disappears.
Yes, we had also given her estradiol for 1 or 2 cycles just to see if the fluid would disappear and to see if the endometrium was responding or whether there was any inherent defect in the endometrium. That also we come to know if we give her 1 cycle prior estrogens. So when we gave estrogen, we saw that the endometrium had developed and the fluid had disappeared. And then in the next cycle, we proceeded on for ovulation induction. So any questions from this in this case?
Someone is asking what is Luveris? So
Luveris recombinant LH. This case was done in 2019 when Luveris recombinant LH was available. Nowadays it is not available. Nowadays combination of recombinant LH and FSH is available. That is by the name of Pergoveris. Now Luveris is no longer available. So now we proceed on to the third case. This is a patient 32 years with primary infertility of 3 years. Her periods were regular. On HSC, the tubes were patent. Semen was normal. She gave history of 3 failed cycles of ovulation induction with clomiphene citrate, and in the last 2 cycles, IUI was also done. Her hormone levels were normal. Now, what is your diagnosis and how will you proceed?
unexplained. A case of unexplained.
Yeah, yeah. This is a case of unexplained infertility where everything is normal, but still the patient is not able to conceive with ovulation induction with oral ovulogens. So, how will you proceed? We discussed with the patient, and she decided to undergo 1 to 2 cycles of ovulation induction with gonadotropins, followed by IUI. So, treatment of this patient of a case of unexplained infertility is controversial. According to the NICE guidelines, if there is unexplained infertility for 2 years, you may directly go in for IVF. But some say that first ovulation induction with gonadotropins and IUI should be tried for 3 to 4 cycles. And if it doesn't work, then you should go in for IVF. So it depends on the age of the patient. This should be if the patient is of young age. So as IUI is less invasive, more comfortable to the patient, and less expensive and safe with a high compliance rate, it should be recommended as the first line treatment of unexplained infertility for couples in whom the woman's age is not more than 38 years. So if the patient is not too much frustrated, she doesn't come from a far off place, the age is young, then you may go in for 2 to 3 cycles of ovulation induction with gonadotropins and IUI. So here the goal is to have 2 to 3 dominant follicles to boost success. There, in case of PCOA, we aim for monofollicular development. Here it is controlled ovarian stimulation, and the goal is to have 2 to 3 dominant follicles to boost success. Trigger is given in the usual way, and this is usually followed by IUI because it is unexplained within 36 hours. Avoid if there are more than 2 mature follicles to reduce the risk of multiple gestation. So in this case, we gave her gonadotropins. This is urinary HMG. This was given from day 5 onwards only. We can here we don't fear about the hyperstimulation. So we started from day 5 onwards. We gave her 4 injections, and when we called her on day 9, luckily there was a follicle in both the ovaries. So we continued the injections, and there was a mature follicle formed on day 12. It was trigger was given, and followed by IUA, and the patient conceived. Even if there are 2 to 3 follicles in one ovary, the other ovary does not respond, that is also okay. It's not necessary that both the ovaries should respond. But sometimes it's not in our hand. When even if we give gonadotropins from day 5 onwards, the follicle, only one follicle develops. So this is a bit tricky.
So, Anupam, regarding this case, what those, supposing there were 4 follicles, what would you have done?
I would have dropped the cycle.
4
Because they-
follicles, you would drop the cycle.
Yeah, four follicles, I would drop the cycle. To recruit, in these cases of unexplained infertility, to recruit more follicles, we start a bit early and on a daily basis.
And do you combine it with letrozole or CC here or no?
We may combine, but it has been seen that the results with Guna, she's already tried with oral ovulogens. She did not want to try, and so we wanted to give a trial of gonadotropin cycle only. But otherwise, we can combine.
And what do you think is the overall success rate with the IUI, because all your patients are conceiving?
No, that I'll come to that. I've taken up only those cases who have conceived. Otherwise, the ovulation rate is different from pregnancy rate. It's not that all those who have ovulated will conceive. So the last case is a 35 years. She was married for 8 years with a secondary infertility of 6 years. Her periods were regular, and she had one child which was spontaneous conception with cesarean section, and it was a male baby, 7 years old. When I did her ultrasound on day 2, there was an antral follicle count of only 2 to 3 in each ovary, and ET was linear. Husband semen was normal, routine investigations were normal. But when I got the AMH done, it was just 0.32 nanogram per ml. There was history of previous 3 cycles of ovulation induction with oral ovulogens, which was unsuccessful. Now, what next would you do?
Anupam, I would like to interrupt you here.
Yes, sir.
With AMH of 0.32 nanograms per ml and AFC of 2 to 3 in each ovary, Do you still stimulate and try to give hope to the patient, or she should straight away move on to home donation IVF?
No, here counseling is very important. Actually, this patient had come from Bihar, all the way from Bihar. Her sister had conceived from me, and so she motivated her to go from Bihar to here. And she was not a affording patient, and she wanted to go in for IUI only. Though I counseled her, so here you should focus on realistic expectations. Don't paint a very rosy picture. You should tell that the ovarian reserve is already quite less, it is reduced, and there is limited success, and she might need IVF or donor oocytes also. So counseling is very important in this case. So, but since the patient was motivated for IUI only and asked me to do at least one cycle, so I started with the moderate dose of 150 units of HMG daily, starting from day 5 onwards. So in these cases, expect limited follicular recruitment because the reserve is already less. Avoid over escalation and counsel her regarding limited success and may need IVF or donor oocytes. So set realistic expectations and individualize the dose. So in
What
this
do you
case,
mean? What do you mean by over escalation?
don't increase too much. Don't go overboard that you give 300 in IUI cycles only, that since the reserve is poor, you give 300 only.
So 150 you think is good enough?
Yeah, 150 is good enough in poor responders for IUI. So here I gave her a Humog, I gave her urinary HMG for 3 days, and when she came, the follicle had recruited and only one follicle developed and matured, and trigger was given followed by IUI, and by God's grace she conceived in this cycle only, in the first cycle only. So now what about the luteal support? Should we give luteal support in these cases? So it is beneficial for ovulation induction with gonadotropins in women with hypothalamic amenorrhea. And luteal support may also be beneficial following ovulation induction with gonadotropins in women with PCOS, though there is insufficient evidence to make a recommendation. And in women with unexplained infertility undergoing ovulation induction with gonadotropins, a meta-analysis of studies on luteal support with progesterone demonstrated a higher live birth rate. So luteal support we normally give in all cases which are stimulated with gonadotropins. Now, this is your question. You were asking all the patients conceived. So we should counsel the patient that ovulation does not mean pregnancy in all cases. Though ovulation may be present in 80 to 90% of cases, but it will not translate into pregnancy in all. So a systematic review of 13 studies evaluated ovulation induction with gonadotropins in anovulatory women and found pregnancy rates of 15% per cycle and 41% per patient with an average of 2.7 cycles. So we can tell her the per cycle the pregnancy rate is 15%, but the cumulative pregnancy rate can be as high as 40 to 50%. And women who were obese or insulin resistant required higher doses of gonadotropins. And a small study of women with hypothalamic amenorrhea demonstrated a pregnancy rate of 25% per cycle. In these patients of which are hypo, they there the pregnancy rate is better because they have never ovulated. So once they ovulate, the pregnancy rate is quite good. Also, in PCOS, I have seen the pregnancy rate is quite good because they are anovulatory, and once the follicle forms and the semen is okay, tubes are okay, they also conceive. So pregnancy rate in anovulatory PCOS and hypo is good, but in poor responders and unexplained infertility, it is not good. So the complications are multiple gestation and OHSS. And as I've told you, to minimize the risk of multifollicular ovulation and multiple pregnancy, cycle cancellation should be considered when there are more than 2 follicles, more than 16 mm, or if if there is 3 or more intermediate sized follicles. Concerns that ovulation induction might be associated with increased risk of cancer of ovary or breast have not been corroborated by subsequent studies. So to conclude, we should tailor dose and protocol to diagnosis and ovarian reserve. In WHO class 1, use HMG or add recombinant LH. In PCO, start low, go slow. In unexplained infertility and poor ovarian reserve, can go for a higher dose and aim for 2 to 3 follicles. So proper counseling, frequent monitoring, and setting realistic goals is the key to success. Thank you.
Uh,
And
Any questions?
next, yeah. Yes.
Dr. Anupam, regarding the last case, can you please repeat that case? She had a AMH of only 0.32
Yes.
and you gave HMG 150
Yes.
for how many days?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days.
And the follicle was there.
Yeah.
This is very unrealistic. I don't know.
No, she was ovulating. She had regular cycles. If they have low AMH, doesn't mean they are not menstruating.
No, but the thing is, she like, I think ma'am can have an expert opinion. Ma'am, AFC and AMH. AMH is the one which tells about the quality of the follicles and the quantity also. And AFC is just 2 to 3. And with 150 HMG, ma'am, I just want your expert opinion.
No, AMH also does not tell about the quality. That also a measure of ovarian reserve only.
That is
Actually,
2 is
that
telling us
is,
ovarian reserve is very poor.
there is nothing which can actually tell you about the quality of oocytes. So, low AMH only means that you will have less number of follicles, but it doesn't mean that pregnancy cannot happen.
But I'm starting 150 HMG because we were planning IUI cycle. That was the only reason. Otherwise,
देखो जिसको what we say is कि जब number of follicles is less, that part you know, she is a case of decreased ovarian reserve, right? Absolutely clear. So if you have to do IUI, then strike hard. This is what I tell my patients, कि strike hard. अगर करना है तो 1-2 cycle करने हैं and we give high dose. 150 usually is okay, but you may increase it to on first ultrasound if you feel that it is little slow, then you can increase it to 225. Generally, you don't have to go to 300 or something. Actually, it doesn't help. Even in IVF, there's a lot of controversy of starting high dose in poor responders. There also they say whether you give 150 or you give 300, the outcome is just the same.
Actually, all these are real cases. Nothing has been cooked. And this patient did conceive in the first cycle.
I don't know. Maybe I was like, okay. And secondly, she was previous cesarean and it was a secondary infertility. So before going to IUI, did you get the HSG done for the tubes?
Yes, HSG was normal.
Yes. Okay.
HSG normally we get it done in most of the cases, but just young patients who do not have any history suggestive of tubal problem, we can skip also. But once you are giving gonadotrophins, so much cost is involved, and you don't want later on some tubal problem may be detected and then you will be blamed.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Mainly for that reason.
One thing more regarding, we were talking about that hypoplastic uterus. So how we have seen that with estrogen, it is like it responds. The uterine size also responds. How often it is seen? A case of hypo, Dr. Anupam was discussing.
Yeah, Anupam?
With estrogen, it does respond. The uterus grows in size and the lining also develops and the fluid disappeared.
So it's like postmenopausal women. The uterus is like that most of the times when we go for ovum donation IVF. When we start estrogen, it just responds.
Okay.
And this uterus is even young. It's not that old. There's no fibrosis. So the moment estrogen comes, it just responds. There are few cases actually, there may be some developmental problem in these hypo cases. If these patients do not receive any HRT before trying for ovulation induction, and HRT is in the form of OCPs, pills. They don't need actually combination pill, because with combination the endometrium doesn't develop and the biometrium doesn't develop. So basically they need sequential. So if you have to give them HRT before like if patient comes to you in adolescence and you have diagnosed hypo and you want to, I mean, not want to, they should be on HRT, then it should be sequential and not OCPs. OCPs are not a good substitute for even bone or uterine health. So reproductive outcome is much better if patient has been on sequential therapy. If somebody has not received any HRT or they were on OCP, sometimes their uterus takes time to respond. And then you have to judge it before starting ovulation induction. And if it's not responding, then few cycles you give of sequential therapy, and most of the times uterus would respond. Sorry.
So the drug of choice will be estradiol, this thing,
Validate. Estradiol validate.
Proganova only, no?
Yeah, it has to be estradiol valerate only, E2,
Yeah.
physiological. It cannot be any synthetic.
Cannot be anything.
Not Premarin. If you are hinting at that, not Premarin.
Very late. Proganova. Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, it is very gratifying if we make these hypo patients pregnant because they have never menstruated. And
Yeah.
when they become pregnant, they're so thrilled. This patient was so thankful because she had never menstruated also. And
Yeah.
to know that she had conceived through IUI only. And so
Really. Lucky you, Anupam.
But here the pregnancy rate is very good in case of hypo.
Yeah. Because what they need is just gonadotropins after priming, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other question? We still have time.
What's your take on hormonal monitoring during the gonadotropin cycle? Any like benefit of monitoring the hormones, or only the ultrasound monitoring is sufficient for this?
Yes, some people do hormonal monitoring, but we only rely on ultrasound monitoring because I think those people who do not do the ultrasound themselves and get the ultrasound done from outside, they mainly get the hormones done. But I mainly rely on ultrasound, and if the follicle is good, if the endometrium is good, I don't think you need to get a hormonal monitoring done.
Okay.
But otherwise, some people do, and this will be discussed in our next class, which is on
monitoring. Yeah.
this
And
is
ma'am, one more question.
how
Like,
to monitor a cycle for COH and IUI, which will be taken on 5th December by Dr. Swati. So here we'll discuss how to monitor a cycle, endocrine monitoring and follicular monitoring with for IUI.
Hello, Dr. Anupam.
Yeah.
Any other name of sequential pills other than Tricolor?
No, sequential is we give estradiol valerate for 20 days and we add Maprate in the last 7 days. That is sequential.
So that is, there's no trade name for this combination.
No, Famostan. There's a tablet by the name of Famostan by Abbott. It has recently come, and it contains 2 milligram of estradiol valerate and 10 milligram of progesterone in the last 10 days. But the more important part with Famostan is that estrogen is never stopped. You just give progesterone for 10 days and the withdrawal will come, but the estrogen is continuous. And because little amount of estrogen is there during menstruation also. So it tries to mimic the physiology more closely.
Natural cycle.
Yeah.
The name is what name you were saying?
Famostan.
Famostan.
And sometimes they do require a little higher dose because that contains only 2 milligram. Here you might have to give 4 milligram per day.
Thank you.
and one more question. In case of thin endometrium, do we have any benefit of using gonadotropins over the oral ovulations? Like oral ovulations, they have anti-estrogenic effect on the endometrium. So any benefit in cases of thin endometrium or when we are struggling with thin endometrium?
Yes, it's a very good question, Gitika. Sometimes oral ovulations, like we know clomiphene or letrozole, they do have some anti-estrogenic effect on the endometrium and it may not reach up to the required size. So here we may resort to gonadotropins. And if it with gonadotropins also the endometrium does not build up, that means there is some inherent defect in the endometrium and we need to do a hysteroscopy and a biopsy. So usually with gonadotropins, this thin endometrium problem is solved.
And how many times, Anupam, did you have to resort to conversion to IVF in PCO patients?
Earlier we used to do it, but nowadays the people they are usually not mentally prepared. If we in midway we decide to go in for IVF, so they say either drop and we'll go wholeheartedly in the next cycle either for IVF or for the second attempt. Mid cycle it's difficult to motivate because they're not mentally prepared. Previously, about 5 years back, they used to do it, but nowadays it's not so. Either the patients directly from the beginning only they say that we want to go in for IVF, and in mid cycle, if we find multifollicular development, they just want to drop the cycle.
And what would be your threshold for shifting to IVF if supposing a patient with PCO, ovulation, IUI, she doesn't conceive after 2 cycles or 3 cycles? So what is your threshold? How
So
many cycles would you do?
with PCO, I usually, in general, if she's ovulating normally,
Yeah, with your
yeah.
ovulation
So
induction.
after 3 to 4 cycles, if she is not able to conceive in spite of adequate ovulation, then I ask her to move on to IVF. It's not that you should go on and on. So 3 to 4 cycles is good enough. And if the patient is of advanced age or the ovarian reserve is less, maybe less number of just 1 or 2 cycles, and we may advise her to go in for the next modality, that is IVF. But sometimes the patient comes from a far off place, she is too much frustrated, there's too much family pressure, then they can opt for IVF at an earlier stage also, especially in cases of unexplained infertility, because they are so much frustrated that everything is okay, still it's not working, so we just want to go in for IVF. And in today's generation, when these IT people, they don't have time and they don't have patience, and they just would directly want to go in for IVF.
There's one question in the chat box from Dr. Dechan. Best timing for IUI, whether it's after 48 hours or after 36 hours?
Between 24 to 36 hours.
Before rupture, actually, most of the times, many times people, try to time it after the rupture, but it's just before the rupture. That's the best time.
Any more questions?
Anybody? And I had one more question for you, Anupam. Just slipped out of my mind. I was just thinking that I will ask.
Actually, to stimulate PCO patients requires really great expertise and great patience. So nowadays, people are opting for IVF at an earlier stage, but previously we used to really struggle to make these patients ovulate to have monofollicular development. Usually, there are so many follicles developing, and you are in a fix as what to do. So PCO stimulating PCO patient is the real difficult thing.
It's very challenging.
And any case of OHSS you have seen with the ovulation induction?
No, we are too scared. We are too scared to to have OHSS.
Because I think with experience you can always make out with what's going to happen, and so you would cut short if more follicles are developing.
Yeah, in this case, which I showed, the when the follicles, the ovary कहते हैं, खाने को आ रही है ये तो all the follicles were started developing, though they were only 11 to 12 mm, but at that stage only we dropped the cycle and asked her to take withdrawal.
And you won't step down the dose.
I don't believe in stepping down the dose. I don't think it works. Then the follicle is not growing with this only. Then how will it grow if we step down the dose? So I don't believe in that hypothesis. I either start a new next cycle. I don't believe in stepping down the dose. It doesn't work.
The patients get very disappointed when the follicle is formed after so much of effort and then they don't conceive. Then how do you counsel them?
So that is the importance of counseling. So prior counseling, before you start a IUI stimulation, that is very, very important. You should counsel it properly that we might have to drop the cycle, and ovulation does not mean pregnancy. So, but this is the only way available. Since you're not ovulating, we have to try some method. And this is the only method we have to give gonadotropins for ovulation, and it might not work. So constantly you have to make the patient mentally prepared for this.
Any other question anybody would like to ask last moment? Otherwise, we can close the session, Geetika.
Okay, ma'am. So I guess there are no more questions. So I would like to thank Dr. Umesh Shindal ma'am for her expert opinion on the role of gonadotropins in ovulation induction. I would like to thank our speaker, Dr. Anupam ma'am, for giving us such a beautiful insight in all the different case scenarios and making us understand what were the practical difficulties we face in our routine practice. So I would like to thank every one of you for joining and participating in the discussion. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for this wonderful session.
Thank you, Geetika.
And
Thank you, ma'am.
we can now close the session. And